So I don't know about you, but when I hear that speech, I'm like, could just be given today and be the same thing. In it, right, among the many, many powerful things he says, and again, I encourage you to seek this one out and read it in full or listen to it in full. Among the many things he says, and one that struck me sort of freshly this time around listening, was that he exhorts clergy members to give up their clergy exemptions to the draft and instead to register themselves as conscientious objectors, because to just take that exemption is to not have to stand on your conviction. And I was really struck this time by that. He also speaks to how being anti-war has become popular, but that there's so much more than being anti-war at stake when you take everything together. And I was reflecting on this, and I was thinking about how when I was a child at school and elsewhere, we listened to King's "I Have a Dream" speech, right? That was the one. And we were asked to imagine the world that he spoke of and see that world already arrived to some degree in our multiracial classrooms and neighborhoods. And we were asked to valorize King and his nonviolence and to see him for the hero and martyr that he indeed was. But we weren't taught about his passion for the intersectionality of justice. We weren't taught that he was anti-war or anti-materialist or anti-greed. We weren't taught that he feared communism far less than the individualism and money-hungry culture he saw growing in his own backyard. King was a proponent of nonviolence and a man who could absolutely paint a picture of justice and righteousness with his words. He had a unique capacity to convey optimism in the face of his own doubts, in the face of ignorance and fear and violence in this country. He was a fascinating man who was far more complex than certainly my generation was taught to understand. Because yes, King was a prophet teaching and preaching against racism and inequality, against segregation and violence committed against others based on the color of their skin. He was a prophet speaking the word about the way the world could be, about the possibility for morality and peace and justice in a language that resonated and extolled and challenged and also comfort, and that is a fine line to walk. He was a prophet helping the entirety of the world see a new way forward. Only in my adulthood have I really come to understand that he was not only a prophet speaking up and out against the structures of racism and power that have plagued this nation since its inception. He was a prophet speaking up and out against a multifaceted tide in American culture that has sadly only risen in the decades since his assassination. When I think of what he would think of this America, I expect he'd be quite disappointed in us, honestly, and the lack of progress we've made on the many fronts he identified. Because he was a prophet pointing to the way we sacrifice people of color and the poor on the altar of America's desire to display its military might around the world, too often becoming embroiled unnecessarily in conflicts as a means of securing economic or political positioning, and too often recruiting among people of color and those with lower economic means, because we've created a military that actually is, if you can survive your service, one of the few ways to achieve upward mobility in this nation. He was a prophet railing against the greed and materialism that have only worsened, landing us in a place where, as Bernie Sanders articulated in 2022 in an article for The Guardian, 3 billionaires own more than the entire bottom 50% of earners in the US, and half of Americans live hand to mouth. The system we have created deepens the divide with each passing year, as social safety nets and educational investment and housing and food become harder and harder to fund and to access. He was a prophet crying out against the hypocrisy of those who said they wanted change in the world, but refused to give up their comforts. And that's the one that is so incisive and kind of hard to stomach. That's the one that says, clergy, don't take that exemption that doesn't require you to take a stand. Because when you don't, you're not putting yourself on the line. That's the critique that says you liberals, middle and upper class liberals who believe in social safety nets and equality, but vote for economic policies that help you retain your wealth, you aren't actually living your values. That's the one that says our activism matters and changing the laws absolutely matter, but we have a cultural problem right here, right now. And it's one that will not change if we do not change. That critique, that whole thing rings as true today as it ever did. Time and time again, he referred to the three great evils of American culture and his time: racism, militarism, and the double-edged sword of greed and poverty. And he knew that those evils were connected. He knew what was needed, and it is gut-wrenching to imagine what he might have said and what movements he might have led had he lived. He would have been 94 today, but his life was cut short at 39. We have hewn his image in stone. We've carved his words into the halls of power. We have lifted up the parts of him that are convenient and easy. But we are called to honor the wholeness of the man and his vision and to own up to the fact that we have not stayed the course. We have not risen to his call for a cultural revolution, a call, I might add, that for the last 55 years, others have taken up and shouted from the rooftops. That's a call for widespread anti-racism that pervades not just laws, but hearts. It's a call for true justice that recognizes our interconnection and our interdependence. It's a call for real peace that stays the hands of those who would raise them in anger and violence. The prophets have come in all those decades since King spoke his prophecy, and we continue to heed their call only in part or in fits and starts. And look, I am not going to stand up here and tell you that I have any idea how we actually make the cultural change that King was calling for. Far better people than I have prophesied and called for it and attempted to rally the nation round. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I know the key to moving the hearts and minds of this nation and altering the course of history. That is honestly an ongoing project that we undertake together every single Sunday, every week in our small corner of the world. And we're just going to have to keep at that in all the ways we can, opening our hearts, bringing our generosity and our compassion and our action for justice into every piece of our own lives. But I am going to say one thing, which is that on a day like today, when we're called to honor this man, we have to do more than hear the words of the prophets of the past that make us comfortable. We have to be open to hearing the words that take us to task and make demands of us, that challenge us, that make us want to change, even if that change is hard and scary and uncomfortable. So this year, instead of letting this service be all that you do, or instead of rereading I Have a Dream, I'm going to ask you to go watch the Beyond Vietnam speech, or read it, whichever's more comfortable for you. I'm going to tell you to go listen to William Barber II and the prophecy he offers right now. I'm going to ask you to go read about the wealth inequality that we face. Read about the racism and transphobia and xenophobia and homophobia and misogyny that we are still contending with today. Go read the letter from Birmingham jail. Ask yourself if you fall in the category of the well-intentioned or in the category of the ones doing the hard work and making the real change. Go brush up on the role the military plays in our society and out in the world at large. See how it makes you feel. Give yourself a chance to consider what peace actually means. Where does it begin? Who is responsible for creating it? Is it possible to make real peace in this world? I think the answer is yes. Ask yourself what, if anything, you are willing to do. What are you willing to sacrifice? What will you change to help justice roll down like waters and peace like an ever-flowing stream? That is the task I give you today, tomorrow, as you observe the day. Take time to really reflect on where we have been and where we are going. And my collective prayer and hope for all of us is that we may have the wisdom and the strength to heed the words of the prophets, those who have come and gone and those who walk among us. And my prayer and my hope is that we have the wisdom and the strength to choose the path of cultural revolution beginning right here in this community we share. So may it be. Please rise in body or spirit. We're going to sing a closing hymn. It's 10:54.